I know I said I wasn't going to be covering this iceberg because a lot of the entries were pretty tame and just a little raunchy for their time, or even more mundanely were critical of religion. As it turns out, a banned movies iceberg isn't necessarily a disturbing movies iceberg. Something doesn't necessarily have to be disturbing for it to be banned for reasons that I just said. There are, however, a few interesting entries among the whole banned movies iceberg that I felt the want to cover, so here I am doing that. And if you find this coverage is a lot shorter than the usual iceberg video, then that would explain it. So let's begin with the banned movies iceberg. Birth of a Nation 1915 is a movie directed by D.W. Griffith. The silent film is a historical drama about the Civil War and Reconstruction, which glorifies the Ku Klux Klan as protectors of white society and depicts African Americans as violent and dangerous inherently. This is, of course, restricted nowadays. You will not find a completely uncritical restreaming of this film, and it's just banned in some cities because of its portrayal of African Americans, most of whom are played by white actors in blackface, which depicts them as lustful, lazy, and villainous in their nature. The KKK is presented as heroic, which has led it to gain some condemnation in modern times. It can be still found nowadays in public domain platforms like YouTube and the Internet Archive, though, of course, its availability nowadays comes with very critical commentary, often being shown as just a piece of the time that it came from. Something interesting, though, is that in February 1915, upon viewing The Birth of a Nation at a special White House screening, the 28th president at the time, Woodrow Wilson, reportedly remarked, "It's like writing history with lightning. My only regret is that it is all so terribly true," which made it the first movie to be screened at the White House, and therefore the first movie to be given a glowing endorsement by a sitting president. The Censored 11, 1933 to 1941 is a collection of 11 animated shorts produced by Warner Brothers that were pulled from circulation in the 60s because of their racial stereotypes that were particularly towards African Americans. These cartoons are banned from television broadcasts and have not been officially re-released due to their overt racism. Many of the cartoons depict African Americans in demeaning ways, with often exaggerated racial features or poor dialect or subservient roles. One of the most infamous cartoons in this collection is Coal Black and De Seven Dwarfs. Where to find this? Well, you can find it mostly in historical archives, private collections, or just through bootleg copies. Warner Bros., of course, is withholding official re-releases. Cannibal Holocaust 1980 was directed by Ruggero Deodato. This is one of the most infamous exploitation films ever made. A group of filmmakers disappear while documenting a remote Amazonian tribe, and their footage reveals horrific violence, including scenes of cannibalism. This was banned in over 50 countries, including Italy, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. In the US, it was banned in several states until certain cuts were made. This film includes actual animal killings, such as a turtle being decapitated and skinned alive, extreme sexual violence, and extremely realistic depictions of human deaths. The film's found footage style was so convincing that the director was charged with murder, which of course were later dropped when he was able to prove that the actors were alive. Nowadays you can find it on DVD, Blu-ray, and through different distributors like Grindhouse releasing with versions that feature edited or unedited cuts. Pink Flamingos 1972 was directed by John Waters. This cult classic movie follows the story of Divine, a drag queen who lives in a trailer with her bizarre family, and she is determined to defend her title as the filthiest person alive. This movie has been banned in several countries, including Australia, Canada, and Norway for its graphic content. Several US theaters also just refuse to show it. The most infamous scene, as I'm sure you've heard of if you've even heard the name of this movie, features Divine eating dog poop, but the film is full of shocking and perverse content, including bestiality, incest, and murder. It was considered too extreme for many theaters, which led to walkouts and protests. Titicut Follies 1967 was directed by Frederick Wiseman. This documentary provides a harrowing look at the conditions inside the Bridgewater State Hospital for the criminally insane in Massachusetts. The movie was banned in Massachusetts and restricted from public viewing for over 20 years due to the concerns about the privacy of the inmates involved. The documentary captures shocking scenes of inhumane treatment, including forced feeding, neglect, and patients just being stripped naked. Authorities argued that it violated the privacy and dignity of the inmates. This movie name, which I can't say, 1975, was directed by Ralph Bakshi. This animated film is a satirical look at race relations in the US, following a group of black characters trying to make their way in a corrupt, racist society. It was banned in theaters and protested by civil rights groups like the NAACP for its use of racial stereotypes. The film, as I'm sure you can tell, uses caricatures of African Americans that many found offensive. Even though Bakshi intended the film as a satire on racism, its violent imagery also made it controversial, and it also raised discussions of when something becomes from satire of a thing to just an example of the thing it was attempting to satirize. Portland Expose 1957 deals with organized crime infiltrating the bar business in Portland, Oregon. It's a semi-fictional account of real events involving the Teamsters Union. It was restricted in some states due to its violent content and portrayal of real-life corruption scandals, which hit too close to home for certain political figures. The film depicts violent acts of sabotage and blackmail, as well as mob coercion tactics. Haxan 1922 is a silent Swedish-Danish documentary-style horror film directed by Benjamin Christensen. Haxan explores the history of witchcraft, showing reenactments of witches, demonic pacts, and inquisitions. It was restricted and banned heavily in several countries, including the United States, for its graphic depictions of nudity, torture, and satanic rituals. The film graphically shows witches being tortured and burned, as well as disturbing scenes involving devils and demons. Its sexually explicit scenes were also shocking for its time, but nowadays it can be found pretty easily. Drug Addict in 1948 was a Canadian documentary directed by Robert Anderson, which focuses on drug addiction and rehabilitation, following the experiences of recovering addicts. It was banned in some US states due to its graphic portrayal of drug use and addiction, as well as fears that it might encourage drug experimentation. It was controversial for its realistic depictions of drug use, including withdrawal symptoms and drug paraphernalia, which were considered too graphic and inappropriate for public audiences. If You Love This Planet 1982 was a short documentary directed by Ter Nash, which features a lecture by Dr. Helen Caldicott on the dangers of nuclear war and calls for disarmament. It was banned in the US for a time due to perceived political subversion, as it was critical of US nuclear policies. The documentary's anti-nuclear stance was seen as threatening by the Reagan administration, which led to restrictions on its distribution. Hillary the Movie 2008 is a political documentary produced by Citizens United and is a critique of Hillary Clinton, which was released during her campaign for the Democratic presidential nomination at the time. It was restricted from airing on television by the FEC due to campaign finance laws. This led to the Citizens United v. FEC Supreme Court case, which ruled in favor of Citizens United, changing campaign finance laws. The entire film was viewed as a political attack ad and led to debates over freedom of speech and the role of corporations in politics. Birth Control 1917 was directed by Margaret Sanger. This documentary promotes birth control and women's reproductive rights, presenting arguments in favor of contraception. It was banned in the US for several years due to its subject matter, which was considered obscene and inappropriate for public discourse. You gotta keep in mind that this was 1917, over 100 years ago. The subject of birth control and contraception is sadly still a contentious topic now, so just imagine how controversial it would have been over 100 years ago. The discussion of contraception and female reproductive autonomy was seen as immoral and indecent during this time. This film is lost media. Bill Cosby's 77, 2014 is a stand-up special by Bill Cosby, which was filmed in 2014, just before the resurgence of sexual assault allegations came to light. The special was pulled from Netflix in the wake of the allegations against Cosby, which led it to be effectively shelved. There wasn't necessarily anything controversial about the contents of the special, but of course the allegations against Cosby casted a dark shadow over its release, which just made Netflix decide, let's not release this. It is currently unavailable on mainstream platforms due to the controversy, and chances are we probably won't see it. Hounddog 2007 is an indie drama directed by Deborah Kampmeyer, which stars Dakota Fanning as a young girl in the rural South who suffers from abuse, which includes a very controversial rape scene. This film was restricted in certain US states and subject to protest due to the explicit and some would say exploitative depiction of child sexual assault. The rape scene involving a young Dakota Fanning sparked outrage among critics and audiences, with many who call it exploitative. I actually think it's okay to have whatever you want in a film, but you gotta do it with taste, and this was not that. And that's it for the banned movies Iceberg. I know this was a very short one, and especially given the amount of time it's been since I've uploaded. I swear I've been wanting to upload more, but I've been a really busy guy as of late for the last few months. Eventually down the line, I will start uploading a lot more often. Just trust me, bro. Source, trust me, bro. I hope to have one, really long video out next month, which, that'll be I'm not going to make any promises on how long it'll be, but it'll be a lot longer than this. One might say it'll probably be my longest video yet, because of just how much there is to it. And now that I'm done explaining all that, yeah, that's about it. I'll see you in the next one.